My name is Alara. I am 35 years old. They left for Greece while I was recovering from surgery. I had paid off our family's mortgage the year before. So, I signed the deed away to someone who actually called me family. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. I was the oldest, the quiet one, the one who stayed. While my brothers ran off to college and then cities with bright lights and bigger lives, I stayed home in the creaky house at the edge of Fernwood Lane. Our family's house. The one with the blue shutters and the uneven walkway. The one where I buried my 20s under caregiving, budgeting, and being told, "You are so good at making things work." Our father passed when I was 27. Heart failure. Sudden and sharp. My mother did not take it well, and I moved back in permanently the next day. My job in event coordination let me work remotely. That was lucky. But I stopped seeing it as luck after the third year of sleeping in the same twin bed I had since I was 12. I thought loyalty mattered. I thought showing up meant something. I paid the mortgage. Every month. Without fail. Even after my father's life insurance ran dry. My brothers, Jeremy and Dylan, sent holiday cards and birthday texts. They called once a month. Maybe. When my mother's hip needed surgery, I drove her to every appointment. When the roof leaked, I paid the contractor. I used the last of my late husband's settlement to cover 3 years' worth of taxes. They said I was strong. What they meant was I was silent. In our family, praise was reserved for progress. Jeremy bought a condo. Everyone cheered. Dylan got promoted. We toasted. When I baked a full Thanksgiving meal after working a 12-hour shift, my mother asked if I had overcooked the turkey. I smiled. I always smiled. We used to host family gatherings in that house. Easters, 4th of July barbecues, birthdays with chocolate cake, and the bell ringing on the porch as guests arrived. My father loved that brass bell. He said it was our welcome sound. I polished it every spring. After he died, no one touched it but me. At some point, I became less a daughter and more a placeholder. A homebody. A convenient fixture in a house no one truly valued, unless they needed it for something. One afternoon, as I set the table for my mother's birthday, I noticed the lack of RSVP from either of my brothers. When I texted the family group chat, Dylan responded 2 hours later. "Oh shoot, forgot. In Miami for the weekend. Happy birthday, Mom." Jeremy said nothing at all. That night, my mother said, "At least they are doing well for themselves. It is nice they can travel." She opened a gift from me, without looking me in the eye. I served her favorite cake. She said it was too sweet. Then she went to bed early. I stayed in the kitchen and stared at the brass bell through the window, catching a flicker of moonlight. I wondered if it would still ring the same, if I were not there. I began to feel like furniture. Useful, unspoken, unmoving. And yet I stayed. Because somewhere in me, I believed that presence was proof of love. I thought that if I just kept showing up, they would remember how much I gave. But love, I would learn, is not a reward for endurance. It is not earned through sacrifice. And sometimes, absence speaks louder than attendance ever could. 1 week later, Dylan texted that they were planning a siblings-only trip to Europe the following month. I was not invited. I did not reply to his message. I simply stared at my screen, the taste of that birthday cake still heavy on my tongue. As they planned their trip abroad, I sat in the house they never visited, and I began to wonder what would happen if it was no longer mine to keep. The next few weeks unfolded with quiet erosion, small absences, thoughtless remarks, and a slow draining of whatever hope I had left. Jeremy called once, not to check on me, but to ask if I could get someone to mow the lawn before the family cookout his wife was planning at our house. Our house. Funny how that word still held meaning for them when it suited their needs. They remembered the house when it came with memories they could show off. When it offered space for their parties, kitchens for their children, or clean sheets on beds they no longer paid for. What they forgot was the grocery bills, the mold in the bathroom ceiling, the dishwasher I bought with my own savings. When Dylan's wife suggested converting the basement into an Airbnb, my mother agreed enthusiastically. They discussed it like I was not even there. As if I would not be the one cleaning it, managing it, hosting strangers in the space I once decorated with photo albums and childhood boxes. They even spoke about removing some of Alera's old stuff to make room. I said nothing, just folded the laundry and nodded. But inside, I was beginning to understand something essential. I had become a ghost with hands, visible only when something needed lifting. They praised Jeremy's new kitchen remodel and Dylan's upcoming cruise. No one asked how I was managing the house's cracked water heater or the rising electric bills. When the storm knocked out our backyard fence, I fixed it myself. Took me 3 days. No one noticed. No one offered help. At a family dinner, Dylan joked about how I had retired early and lived rent-free. My mother chuckled. Jeremy added that I should teach them my trick to low-stress living. I laughed too, because I did not know how else to respond to being erased in real time. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow, ashamed that I still hoped they might see me. I still packed lunches for my mother. Still cleaned the porch where they once opened Christmas gifts. Still paid the plumber who replaced the water lines. They posted photos of their vacations with captions about family and gratitude. Not once did they mention me. I kept track not because I was bitter, but because I needed to remember I was not imagining it. I needed to hold on to truth before gaslighting came wrapped in smiles and silence. One afternoon, I opened the cabinet under the sink and saw a stack of old invoices. There it was in black and white, my name on every payment. The final mortgage receipt. The insurance. The repairs. I had bought their history. Maintained their legacy. And all they saw was free storage. A friend came by to drop off soup. She was the only one who knew I had been sick for weeks. Bronchitis that would not let go. I mentioned that Jeremy was asking about the lawn again, and she blinked. She looked around my home, at the family portraits, at the echo of other people's lives, and asked softly, "Do you even live here, Alera? Or are you just a caretaker they forgot to thank?" I could not answer. My throat ached from more than coughing. That question stayed with me. The next week, Dylan emailed me. Not called, emailed. He asked if I could handle getting the patio redone in time for their next visit. He included a Pinterest board his wife had made. No offer to help. No mention of cost. Just expectation. They booked flights. I booked doctor's appointments. That sentence echoed through me like a wound. I had covered the cost of my mother's new medication last month, and the garage light that short-circuited, and the pest control. My brothers sent postcards from their trip to Spain. Wish you were here. But they never asked why I was not. They never remembered I was recovering from surgery. Never sent flowers. Never called the hospital. When the chimney needed urgent work, I dipped into the last of my savings. Still, I said nothing. I waited, because I wanted to believe the people I loved would see me. That maybe, this time, they would ask how I was doing before asking for a favor. But love without recognition is not love. It is labor. And I was so tired of being everyone's labor. I stood in the kitchen that once held laughter and scraped dried icing from the floor alone. Their emails piled up with more requests, more demands. They saw me as permanent background, reliable, invisible. But every foundation, even stone, has a limit. And mine was beginning to crack. The house I paid for had become a stage for other people's pride. I realized this most clearly the night of the cookout, the one Jeremy's wife insisted on throwing to bring everyone together. It was held in the backyard I had landscaped. Under string lights I hung myself, with food she ordered from a caterer but asked me to plate. By 6 o'clock, the yard buzzed with laughter, voices, and chairs scraping across the patio. My brothers moved through the crowd like hosts. Their wives wore matching dresses. Their children ran in circles. My mother sat at a table under the oak tree, retelling stories from when the boys were young. I walked out holding the extra plates someone had forgotten to set. Paper plates, no less. Not the real dishes tucked away inside the cabinets I organized by hand. As I set them down, I heard someone say, "Alera always knows where everything is. She has not changed a bit." They smiled at me like I was wallpaper. Nostalgic. Functional. Faded. Jeremy raised his glass for a toast. I waited foolishly, to hear my name. Something, anything, to show that they saw the woman who kept the lights on. He thanked family, resilience, and new beginnings. Everyone clapped. He did not thank me. Then came the family photo. Jeremy's wife called out for just the siblings. I stepped forward, instinctively. She waved me aside. No worries, Alara. Can you take it for us? I froze, then nodded. As I held the camera, framing the shot of the three of them, Jeremy, Dylan, and my mother, shoulders touching, smiles wide, the oak tree behind them, I felt something inside me dim. I had no place in the picture. I was not family enough for the frame. Afterward, I went inside to the kitchen. The caterer had left already, and someone had spilled wine near the sink. I cleaned it alone. From the window, I could see the guests beginning to say their goodbyes. No one came in to help. I opened the freezer to find the ice cream I bought for the kids. It was gone. Just the sticky lid remained. On the counter, Jeremy's wife had left a list of things to fix before our next visit. She had written it in permanent marker. I stared at the words. Clean gutters. New patio chairs. Replace curtain rods in guest room. My guest room. My home. The doorbell rang, and I walked to answer it, passing the brass bell still hanging near the entryway. It had not rung all evening.
It used to welcome people.
Now it stayed silent like me. The next morning, I found a crumpled napkin in the sink with a single sentence scribbled in pink lipstick. Make sure the sheets are washed before the twins come next month. They were planning another visit, another stay. They had assumed I would be here, waiting, preparing. They did not ask. They never had to. That week, my mother mentioned offhandedly that Jeremy and Dylan were looking into pooling resources to turn the house into a vacation rental. They would love to keep it in the family, she said, stirring her tea, not meeting my eyes. She added, they said you probably would not mind staying in the guest house once they renovate. The guest house. The one we used for storage. Drafty, no insulation, barely functional plumbing. I laughed once. A dry, cracked sound. Why would I live in the guest house? I asked. She looked surprised. Well, the boys are doing so much, and you do not really use all the space. It is not like you entertain. I said nothing. I looked around at the home where I had watched my father die, where I folded 1,000 towels, where I planted tulips each spring because they reminded me of hope. The walls had grown too heavy with memories that no longer belonged to me. That night, I sat on the porch and ran my fingers along the curve of the brass bell. I remembered the sound it made the day my father carried me home from school after I scraped my knees. The ring it gave off when my late husband and I hosted our first and only anniversary dinner under its chime. No one had touched it in years.
No one even looked at it.
They passed it on their way to everything else.
Like they passed me.
The silence was not new. It had just gotten louder. And in that quiet, a decision began to form. I sat on the steps beneath that bell, alone in a house I owned but never claimed. Their laughter still echoed faintly from my walls, but none of it was mine. They were planning renovations. I was planning something else, something quieter, stronger, final. It was my body that finally told the truth. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday. A persistent ache in my side had worsened for weeks. I ignored it, of course. There were bills to sort, laundry to fold, prescriptions to refill for my mother. But the pain sharpened until I could not breathe without wincing. I drove myself to urgent care. Alone. They found the problem quickly. A ruptured ovarian cyst. The kind of pain that makes silence curl inward. They said I would need minor surgery and a few days of recovery. I nodded. I smiled. I signed the consent form with shaking hands. In the hospital bed, the fluorescent lights hummed above me, cold and indifferent. I texted Jeremy and Dylan. Just 3 words. In the hospital. Jeremy replied 6 hours later. Oh no. Hope it is nothing serious. We are boarding soon. Boarding. Dylan never replied. I scrolled their social media 2 days later. Jeremy's wife had posted a photo of the family at the airport, grinning, luggage piled behind them. Caption: Off to Greece. Family first. Family first. They had planned this vacation weeks ago. They knew I had been sick. My mother had told them. She told me so herself, said they felt bad but needed the break. No one called. No one asked the hospital's address. No one brought flowers or asked if I needed anything. Not even my mother. She left a voicemail the day of my discharge. Something about needing help moving her clothes into storage before the boys come back. I lay in that thin, squeaky hospital bed with N4 in my arm and realized something so painfully simple. No one was coming. No one was checking. No one cared if I came home or not. And that is when the pain shifted, deepened, then disappeared. Not from my body, but from somewhere quieter, somewhere deeper. I stopped waiting for them. When I was released 2 days later, the nurse asked who was picking me up. I said, "No one." She looked surprised, then soft. "Do you want us to call someone?" I shook my head. I signed the papers, took my plastic bag of prescriptions, and stepped into the sunlight, a cab waiting at the curb. I rode home, staring out the window as streets blurred past, each block a reminder that no one in my life had room for me beyond convenience. When I walked into the house, it smelled stale, like fabric softener and forgotten apples. There was no note, no food, no sign that anyone had noticed I was gone. I stood in the doorway, weak, tired, and utterly hollow. Then I looked at the bell. Still there. Still hanging. Still clean. I took it down and placed it gently in a box. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the file I kept tucked in the back of the cabinet, the one labeled Documents, House,
Deed,
Title, Insurance, Receipts, Mortgage Confirmation, Final Payoff Notice. Every single item bore one name.
mine.
Not Jeremy's, not Dylan's, not my mother's, just mine. My pen, my account, my life. I traced the letters of my own name like a person finally reading her own signature. They never asked, never wondered, never cared, because they assumed I would always be here, assumed I owed them something, assumed the house belonged to them because they had memories here. But I had something they never saw coming. Proof. And in that quiet moment, no louder than the beat of my own heart, I made a decision. I would not beg to be seen. I would not argue to be respected. I would not wait to be loved the way I deserved. I would leave, and I would do it in a way they would never forget. As the streetlights flickered on outside my window, I sat in the home I paid for with a healing wound and a heavy truth. They had taken everything but the one thing they never thought to claim, my power. And I was finally ready to use it. What would you have done in her place? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments. In the days that followed, I moved slowly, not just because of my healing body, but because slowness became my sanctuary. The house grew quiet, and I let it. I did not return my mother's calls. I did not answer Dylan's wife's text asking if I could deep clean the guest room before their return. I let the messages pile up like dust on a shelf I no longer planned to polish. I kept my movements soft, cleaned only what mattered to me, folded the linens I cared about, watered the garden without announcing it. I stopped pretending the house was theirs to enter without knocking. And I began sorting not emotionally, not yet, but practically. I started in the attic, labeled old bins, marked what to keep, what to give away, what to let go of.
There was an odd piece in that.
A clarity. I found an old photo of my father, taken right after he installed the brass bell. He looked proud, his hand resting on my shoulder. I was barely 10, squinting up at him. I traced the bell's shape in the photo, then reached for the real one, now wrapped in cloth and stored in the cedar chest by my bed. I whispered aloud. I still remember how it sounded, but I did not cry. I started spending evenings on the back porch, watching the sun tuck itself behind the trees, drinking tea, sometimes just staring at nothing. I let silence wash over me, not as punishment, but as freedom. For the first time in years, I was not anticipating anyone's needs. The neighbors noticed. Mrs. Cullen next door dropped off fresh bread one afternoon. She said she had not seen the family around lately.
They're traveling, I said.
She nodded. You always were the one holding the place together. I thanked her, and she looked at me differently, like someone waking up to a fact that had always been there. That night, I opened the drawer beside my bed and pulled out the envelope that changed everything, the property tax reassessment. A note in fine print at the bottom reminded me of something I had known but forgotten. Widowed homeowners in the district received major benefits. My name. My status. My name alone. I folded the paper slowly, methodically, and placed it beside the deed. Then came the letter, from Mr. Cray, my father's oldest friend. It arrived in a cream envelope. Inside, a handwritten note thanking me for the Christmas cookies I dropped off last year. He wrote that his granddaughter was moving back to town and looking to buy a home, preferably a place with history. Character. A porch. He asked if I knew anyone selling. I read it twice. I did not answer that day. I simply sat with the letter and let the possibility bloom in the corner of my mind. What if I did not wait for them to leave me behind? What if I left first? One afternoon, I sat in the dining room and ran my fingers along the edge of the table. I had bought it after our old one cracked. Paid for it myself. No one noticed when it arrived. They just started using it. Like everything else. I opened my laptop. Began scanning through my documents. Downloaded a checklist. How to prepare your home for sale. Simple.
Clear.
I started ticking boxes. I called the realtor recommended in Mr. Cray's letter. We met quietly. She walked through the home with soft steps and a pen that did not hesitate. She said, "You have kept it so beautifully." I smiled. She meant me, not you all. Not your family. She saw me. We spoke for 45 minutes. I told her I wanted discretion. No open houses. No signs. Just a clean sale. A quiet ending. She nodded. By the time Jeremy posted a beach photo captioned, "Recharging with family," I had already begun signing papers. No one knew. Because I said nothing. Because sometimes silence is the final rebellion. One night, I lit a candle beside my bed and held the brass bell in my hands. It was heavier than I remembered. And that is when I knew I would not leave it behind. Not this time. As they danced across Grecian islands, sipping wine and posting smiles, I sat in the heart of the home they never bothered to see. Their laughter echoed online. My silence deepened in real life. But deep within that stillness, something was rising, a final act they would never see coming. The air in the house felt different now, lighter, like it knew something no one else did. Each day became a quiet preparation, a gentle winding down. I cleaned with care, but not for guests. I folded linens I would pack. I labeled the boxes I would keep. Everything else I donated. I did not tell anyone. Not my mother. Not Jeremy. Not Dylan. Especially not them. I began to look at the house the way a guest might, detached, curious, already on their way out. The corners I used to fill with fresh flowers were now bare. The hallway I dusted every week no longer needed me. Even the echo of footsteps on the wooden floorboards seemed like a goodbye. Then came the call from the realtor. She had found the perfect buyer, Mr. Cray's granddaughter, Mira. Recently divorced. Starting over. A schoolteacher. Someone who wanted a home with soul, not perfection. I told her about the bell. The realtor said gently. She said she loves stories. I nodded. I had one. We scheduled the first walkthrough. I walked room to room that morning, whispering goodbyes. To the kitchen I had once danced in. To the living room where my late husband read poetry aloud. To the windows that held the light just right in May. But there was no sadness. Just a kind of peace I had forgotten was possible. When Mira arrived, she stepped in with bare feet, an odd but beautiful gesture. She said she liked to feel the house. She stopped at the doorway and closed her eyes. "I can tell someone loved this place," she said. I did not speak, just nodded. She walked the whole house in silence, not like a critic, like someone listening. When she reached the porch, she saw the brass bell wrapped in cloth, sitting on the bench. She touched it reverently. "You are taking this with you, I hope," she said. I am. She smiled.
Good.
It belongs with you. That night, the offer came through, generous, clean, sincere. A number I never expected, not just financially, but emotionally. It was the cost of closure, the price of freedom. I signed. And then, quietly, I gathered the deed, the original, the proof, the final record. My name, written in permanent ink. The document Jeremy and Dylan never once asked about. They had always assumed the house belonged to all of us. That it was inherited. That because it had been filled with our memories, they were owed a part of it. But I had paid the taxes,
Paid the debts. Paid the price.
and in the end, I had paid it off. Alone. I pulled out the tax reassessment again, proof of my widow's exemption, of the name that matched every record, every line. The house was mine. Not symbolically. Legally. I stared at the envelope for a long time. Then I took a pen and wrote something across it in soft script. Not everything shared is mutual. Some things are earned. The next day, I received a group text from Dylan. ETA back home next Saturday. Can't wait for that famous Alara welcome smiling face with hearts. That sentence stunned me. Back home. He still believed this was his home. They all did. They believed it because I never told them otherwise. Because I stayed quiet. Because I kept the light on. Because I played the part they needed, unseen, unpaid, reliable. But now I held the final script, and I was rewriting it. I booked a moving truck.
Small.
Efficient. Scheduled for the Thursday before they returned. I called the realtor one last time. It is happening, I said. I know, she whispered. You're doing the right thing. I spent the next 2 nights boxing the last of my personal things. Old journals, a shawl from my honeymoon, the recipe card with my father's handwriting. I placed the brass bell on top, wrapped in velvet. Then I sat at the dining room table, opened a blank piece of paper, and wrote a letter. Not an explanation. A confirmation. Just 2 sentences. You are welcome here. You just never knocked. Now there is no door. I folded it carefully and tucked it into the drawer with the spare key, the one I had never told them existed. Then I left the kitchen light on. Just once more. Viral quote. They raised her to be chosen. I raised myself to survive. As the papers were filed and the moving truck confirmed, I sat in the house that held their memories, but only honored my sacrifice. They were flying home expecting a welcome, but I was no longer the woman who waited at the door. I was the one who held the key and the right to lock it. I know because Jeremy's wife posted a photo from the plane window captioned, "Home sweet home. Missed our backyard wine nights." Only, it was no longer their backyard. They had no idea. The sale had finalized 2 days earlier. All paperwork signed, funds transferred, title updated. Mira was set to move in the following week. I was already gone. The movers came early Thursday morning. No fanfare. Just 2 quiet men who handled each box with care. I stood on the porch as they loaded the last of it, the final piece being the small crate marked bell. I had already locked the brass key inside the drawer beneath the mantel, next to the letter. I walked through the house one last time. I did not feel loss. I felt air, a kind of breathing I had forgotten my chest could hold. When I turned off the lights, I paused by the front door and whispered, "Thank you for holding me, even when they did not." Then I left the house they never visited. 2 days later, the car pulled into the driveway, Jeremy, Dylan, and their families. Suitcases, sunglasses, matching shirts. They laughed as they walked toward the porch. But the door would not open. The key did not work. They tried the back.
Locked.
Jeremy called my cell. It went to voicemail. Then they noticed the paper taped inside the front window. Private residence. New ownership effective immediately. For questions regarding property, please contact Cray and Associates Realty. Silence. I imagine it washed over them slowly, like cold water. They had expected the usual, clean sheets, food stocked, air conditioning humming. Instead, they found confusion. They stood on the porch where they once posed for photos, now facing a home that did not belong to them. And then Dylan saw the envelope taped beside the doorbell. He opened it. Inside, one sheet of paper. My handwriting. You left me alone in surgery while you posted cocktails. You never asked who owned the deed. You assumed. And now, you are guests without a reservation. No anger. No cruelty. Just truth. Beneath it, I had paper-clipped a photocopy of the deed. My name. My signature. Final date of ownership, 7 years earlier. Not inherited. Not shared. Purchased. Paid in full.
Mine.
I imagined Jeremy's hands shaking as he read it. Dylan pacing. Their wives calling my mother, who could only respond with a stunned whisper. I thought we were keeping it in the family. But the family never asked who was keeping it. They only assumed I would. Because I always had. They never questioned how the taxes got paid. How the new water heater appeared. How the light stayed on even when they forgot to send birthday cards. They thought their memories gave them rights. But I had the receipts. When Mira arrived with her U-Haul that afternoon, Jeremy approached her like he still held power. There must be a mistake, he said. She showed him the contract. The title.
The key.
There is no mistake, she replied. And then she rang the brass bell. Its chime rang through the yard like a verdict. That moment, I imagine, was when they finally understood. They thought I was a guest. I was the owner. As they stood locked out of a house they never claimed in love or labor, I watched the lake ripple outside my new window, the bell resting beside me like a vow. They had flown thousands of miles home, only to find they no longer had one. And I had finally built mine. The calls came in waves. First Jeremy, 4 times in 1 hour. Then Dylan. Then their wives. Then my mother, whose voice cracked in a voicemail she ended with, "You blindsided us." Blindsided. A curious word, when I had been invisible to them for years. I let the calls ring. I let the messages pile. I did not respond. Because there was nothing left to explain. The facts were clear. The house was mine. Now it was Myra's. The silence I had worn like armor had become a wall, and they were now on the other side of it. But still, they tried. Jeremy sent a long, emotional email. He wrote about memories, family traditions, and feeling disrespected. He said they only wanted to preserve our childhood. Said I should have discussed it with them first. I reread it twice. Nowhere did he ask if I was okay. If I had recovered. If I had needed anything. His pain was only about what he lost. Never about what I had lived. My mother called next. This time, I answered. Her voice was small. "Why, Alara?" I said nothing at first. Then, "Because you never asked what it cost me to stay." She tried to soften her tone. Said they were hurt. That families should communicate. I wanted to scream. But I did not. I simply said, this was communication. Just not the kind you are used to. Then I ended the call. I needed closure, but not a conversation. That week, Mira moved in. I sent her a bouquet of white lilies and a note that read, "Take care of it." It held a lot. She sent me a photo of the bell hanging on her porch. It glowed in the sun. A week later, I received an invitation in the mail. A family dinner. At my cousin Rachel's house. To clear the air, it said. Everyone will be there. I sat with it for a day. Then I decided to go. Not for closure. For confirmation. I wore navy. Simple. Classic. My mother's pearls, because sometimes silence needs symbols. I arrived early. Parked down the street. Walked with calm steps. Inside, I was greeted with tight smiles and stilted hugs. Jeremy avoided eye contact. Dylan looked at the floor. My mother patted my hand, as if that would suffice. We sat at the long table. There were extra seats, just like our holiday dinners growing up. Rachel tried to break the tension with a toast.
To family, she said.
I did not raise my glass. The room shifted. Then Jeremy cleared his throat. So, he began. About the house. I stopped him with one sentence. I brought the documents. I reached into my leather bag and placed a folder on the table. Inside, copies of the deed, payment receipts, letters from the realtor, the property tax exemption form, all bearing one name.
Mine. I did not hand them out.
I let them sit in the center of the table. Visible. Undeniable. They stared at it like a flame they had never seen lit. I sat back. Let the silence do what my voice never could. My mother opened the folder. Scanned a few pages. Her lip trembled. Not from grief. From realization. Jeremy shifted in his chair. "You should have told us," he muttered. I looked up. "You should have asked." Dylan finally spoke. "You really sold it?" "Yes." "To a stranger?" "No," I said. "To someone who knocked before entering." There were no raised voices. No accusations. Just the soft crumble of entitlement under truth. I stood. I did not come here to argue. I came here to confirm that I owe no one anything. Then I pulled out one final item. The photo. The one I had taken during that cookout. The one where they stood for the siblings-only picture and asked me to take it. I had kept it. Framed it. I placed it gently on the table next to the folder. They stared at their own smiles. "Remember when I was the one holding the camera?"
I said.
"I remember everything." And with that, I walked away. As I stepped outside into the evening light, I felt no triumph, only peace. Behind me sat the picture of a family that once erased me from its frame. In front of me was the life I had chosen without them. But the moment of truth was still to come, when the silence inside the room would grow loud enough to shatter what they thought they knew. I returned home that night, not to the house I once maintained for others, but to the small lake cottage I had quietly purchased just 2 towns over. It had white shutters, a porch that hummed in the breeze, and windows that caught morning light like stained glass. It was not large, but it was mine in the truest sense, not because I paid for it, but because no one else believed they were entitled to it. I unpacked slowly. Tea kettle. Favorite blanket.
Books.
And the bell. It now hung beside my new front door. Its sound rang clearer than I had ever heard it before. 3 days after the confrontation at Rachel's, I received a text from her. "I think they finally get it." Slowly. I did not need them to get it. I needed them to leave it behind. But I knew one final moment was still to come. The community center in our neighborhood had scheduled its annual heritage event, an open invitation gathering honoring families who had lived in town for over 30 years. They called it Legacy Sunday. Every year, one family was asked to share their story. My family had always declined. Too much hassle. Not enough time. But this year, the committee asked me directly. They had seen my name on property records, seen how long I had been listed as homeowner. They wanted someone with roots. I said yes. I arrived quietly. The center was full. Rows of chairs, a modest podium, soft lighting. Pictures from past events lined the walls. Generations captured in still frames. When it was my turn to speak, I walked up with the bell in hand. No paper. No speech. Just presence. I placed the bell on the podium and looked out at the room. "My name is Alara. I lived on Fernwood Lane for 13 years. Some of you know the house. Blue shutters. Porch that creaked when it rained. My father loved it. My husband proposed to me under its oak tree." I paused. Let the silence settle. "I paid the last of the mortgage 5 years ago. Alone. And last month I sold it. Not out of bitterness. Out of completion." People shifted in their chairs. Some nodded. I was not always seen in that home, but I saw everything. Every birthday forgotten. Every meal I cooked that no one thanked me for. Every time I was told the house belonged to all of us, while I was the only one who stayed. I picked up the bell. This bell used to mean welcome. Then it became silent. Now it means something else to me. It means truth. I rang it once.
Clear. Steady.
They clapped for her. But when I stood, they went quiet. Because they were there. Jeremy. Dylan. My mother. Tucked in the back row. No one had announced them. They had come late. Sat in silence. And now they sat in the stillness that followed the bell's chime. There was no applause.
Not yet.
I smiled gently.
Not at them.
At the room. I no longer live in that house. But it lives in me, reminding me that you do not need permission to leave a place where you are only tolerated. I nodded once. stepped back. And that is when the applause began. Not a ripple. A wave. Long, full, real. I did not look toward the back row again. I did not need to. Their silence said enough. The sound I heard now was the one I had waited for my whole life. Not validation. Acknowledgement. And it came not from the people who claimed to love me, but from those who saw me clearly for the first time. As the applause carried me off that small stage, the bell still warm in my hand, I walked past the row where my family sat frozen. No words, no defense, no applause. They had always believed silence meant consent. Now they were learning what it meant when the silence belonged to me. Have you ever seen someone underestimate the wrong person? Tell us your story in the comments. After the event, I did not rush out. I stayed for the pie. I let the conversations wash over me. People came up to thank me, strangers who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. One woman touched my shoulder and said, "You said what so many of us feel, but never dare speak." An older man pressed my hand with quiet reverence. "My daughter gave everything to this family. Then they forgot her. Your words, they woke something in me." I nodded. I smiled. I accepted each moment of acknowledgement, not as praise, but as balance. The applause had faded, but the shift remained. When I finally left the center, the bell in my bag, I saw them, my mother, Jeremy, and Dylan, standing near the exit. They did not block my way. They stood close together but looked nothing like a united front. My mother's eyes were rimmed with red. Dylan's arms were folded. Jeremy looked like he wanted to speak but had forgotten how. I kept walking. Then Jeremy called after me, his voice low.
Alara.
"Wait." I paused. He stepped forward, fumbling with something in his hands. I saw the deed.
The receipts.
I just never thought. "You never thought," I said, cutting gently. He blinked. "You never asked. You never wondered. You just assumed I would always be there." "I thought it was ours," he said. "It never was." Dylan's voice joined then, more strained. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "I did," I said. "In every quiet gesture, you never noticed." They looked down. My mother tried next. "We didn't mean to make you feel." "You didn't make me feel anything," I said. "You just revealed who you were when you thought I would always stay." Silence. Then Jeremy stepped back. "I guess we deserve that." I did not answer, because it was never about what they deserved. It was about what I had carried. I walked to my car without another word. I saw them in the rearview mirror, small, uncertain, still expecting me to turn around and make it easier. I did not. Back at my lake cottage, I placed the bell back on its hook. The sun was setting, casting gold across the water. There was no rage in me, no bitterness, just space. Space that had never been offered, and now belonged to me alone. In the following weeks, Jeremy sent a letter. Handwritten. Apologetic, clumsy, late. He said he realized how little they had seen me, how much they had taken for granted, how blind they had been to my life outside their needs. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Dylan emailed once.
Short.
"I'm sorry. I see it now." I did not reply. My mother sent a package, an old photo of my father with me at the bell. No note, just the photo. A small attempt, maybe, at remembering who I had been before they turned me into a servant in my own story. I kept that photo. Not for them. For me. To remember that even when no one clapped, I had been holding everything together. Now I did not have to hold anything at all. As the letters arrived and the silence from my end deepened, they began to understand what absence really felt like. Not the kind that leaves a room, but the kind that takes the light with it. They had wanted forgiveness on their timeline, but I had already moved on, and that they would have to live with. Time passed differently when I no longer carried other people's expectations. In the months after the reveal, I moved quietly into my new rhythms. Morning tea, with warm light spilling across my kitchen table. Evening walks by the lake, where the breeze did not ask anything of me. No one stopped by unannounced. No one left passive-aggressive notes on the fridge. There were no calendars filled with someone else's errands. No phone calls about gutters or guest rooms. Only space. Only air. Only me. Jeremy called once. Left a voicemail. Just 5 words. I hope you're doing okay. I never called back, because I was not obligated to answer echoes of a concern that had come too late. Dylan sent a message on my birthday. Thinking of you. He had forgotten it the past 3 years. I had spent those birthdays alone, baking my own cake, lighting my own candle. I replied this time, not with words, but with silence. My mother tried to plan a lunch.
She said she wanted to talk.
No pressure, of course. I politely declined. Not out of anger, but because I no longer fed parts of myself to prove I was still worth keeping around. They did not understand, at first, how final it was. How clean. How complete. They had always seen relationships as elastic, able to stretch and snap and stretch again. But I had lived in the tension for too long. That kind of stretch does not bounce back. It breaks. Rachel visited once. She sat with me on the porch and said, "They don't know what to do with the guilt." I nodded. She asked if I missed them. "Sometimes," I said, "but not in the way they think." She looked confused. "I miss who I hoped they would become, not who they are." She squeezed my hand. That was enough. I kept the bell where it belonged, on my porch, where it caught the wind like a breath that remembered how to exhale. I began volunteering at the local library, started a small book club, hosted a women's circle on Sundays where no one had to explain their pain to be believed. I found joy in the mundane. Warm bread,
Clean sheets.
quiet afternoons with nothing on the calendar. And slowly, I realized something even more powerful than revenge. I no longer needed closure. I had already closed the door and locked it with my own key. The house on Fernwood Lane now had flower boxes Mira had planted, fresh paint on the door, and a welcome mat that read, "Peace lives here." She sent me a card once, thanking me for trusting her with it. It was the most sincere thank you I had received in 10 years. And it came from someone who had never called me sister. Sometimes I walked past it on my way to the store. I never lingered, never peered through windows.
It was no longer mine.
But it had never really been ours.
Just mine.
Until I let it go. As I returned home from one of those quiet walks, the brass bell chimed behind me, as if blessing my every step. They were still reaching for fragments of the past, hoping to rebuild what they once ignored. But I had already buried that version of me, and grown something softer, stronger, and free in its place. It has been nearly a year. Sometimes I still wake early, expecting the weight of other people's needs to pull me out of bed. But those mornings come less often now. These days, I rise for the light, not for the obligation. I drink my tea slowly. I let the day arrive without a list. My peace no longer feels borrowed. The lake outside my window mirrors the sky so clearly, I forget where one ends and the other begins. That is what healing feels like, soft edges. Gentle ownership. I am not angry anymore. Anger was useful once. It cracked open the shell of silence I had lived in for too long. It gave me the strength to stand. But now I do not need it. I carry something quieter, something firmer. Self-respect. I think often about the girl I was at 27, the one who moved back home thinking love looked like sacrifice. I want to reach through time and hold her hand. I want to tell her she was not wrong for trying, but she was wrong for thinking that trying harder would change people who only knew how to take. She deserved more. And now so do I. The house is no longer a wound. It is a closed chapter. A story I tell only when someone asks why I keep a brass bell by my door. I tell them it is a reminder that the sound of welcome must be mutual. I do not see my family often. Jeremy sends holiday cards now, generic, polite, late. Dylan tried to organize a family reunion, but I declined. Told him I already had a family now, women who show up, friends who knock, neighbors who remember my birthday and bring soup when it rains. My mother wrote once more. Said she missed me. Said she wished things had been different. I wished that too. But wishes are not bricks. They do not build what was never truly made. So I lit a candle that night and prayed, not for reconciliation, but for release. And in the soft glow of that tiny flame, I whispered thank you to my past self. For leaving. For choosing peace over performance. For becoming the kind of woman who no longer needs to explain why her presence is a gift. Some days, I visit the garden at the edge of the community center. I volunteer there now. Plant flowers. Watch them bloom in rows I once believed were for others. Every spring, I plant tulips. My favorite. My father's favorite. They remind me that things return, but not always the same. Sometimes, they return stronger, quieter, rooted. I do not need their apology anymore, because I have my life back. And in this quiet, I hear everything I used to beg for. Affirmation, respect, belonging. It was never in their hands. It was always in mine. If you've ever had to walk away from family for your own peace, know this. You're not alone. Share your story below. Somewhere, someone is finding the courage you already carry. If you stayed with me until the end, thank you. This was never just a story about a house. It was a story about recognition, about what happens when you give everything and are seen as nothing. And it was about what comes after. There are thousands of us, quiet sisters, dutiful daughters, the dependable ones who stayed behind while others moved forward. We give, we serve, we hold it all together until we break. But here is what I know now. Breaking is not the end. Sometimes it is the beginning. Walking away is not betrayal. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. Letting go is not weakness. It is strength.
Soft.
Unapologetic. Sacred. So if you have ever been erased, overlooked, or expected to give without thanks, remember this. You are not a background character in your own life. You are the author, the anchor, the name on the deed. And when the time comes, you are allowed to close the door and keep walking. If this story touched something in you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Every week, we share stories like this, of women reclaiming space, rewriting endings, and choosing dignity over duty. Because sometimes, the quietest exit is the loudest victory. And sometimes, the bell rings not for guests, but for the one who finally came home to herself.